My husband and I love to spend time together, but we don't get to go on actual dates very often. So last weekend for Valentine's, I thought I would do a little something special for a date night in. I made cauliflower soup in bread bowls inspired by Splash Cafe from San Luis Obispo, which is also the college town where we met. I started off the morning by making pavlova, which is an excellent make-ahead dessert. If you've never made it before, I highly recommend you try it. It's perfect at the end of a heavier dinner because it's light and fluffy and crunchy, and there's almost endless toppings you can put on it. Pavlova uses a lot of egg whites, so I use the extra egg yolks to make a raspberry curd to go on top of the pavlova. Then I got started on the herbed bread, which I was going to use for my bread bowls. I like to keep my yeast in the fridge because it extends the life of it, and I always use a scale when I'm making my bread to make sure it's exact. We have a few herbs growing outside in our garden, including rosemary and sage, so I used that for the bread, as well as some fresh basil I had in the fridge already, and some dried thyme and oregano. After mixing the bread, I put it in my favorite cozy warm spot to rise, and then contemplated what I should make for lunch because we were gonna go on a hike to the beach. I made this Italian-style dense bean salad. It was delish, and the weather was perfect. When I got back, I unloaded the dishwasher to make it easier to clean up after the dinner that night. Then I got started making the bread. Then I started chopping the cauliflower to be roasted in the oven for the cauliflower soup. Technically, the soup that inspired this dinner was a clam chowder, but I didn't feel like feeling what I would feel like after I eat a clam chowder, and I don't even know where a girl is supposed to find clams. I roasted the onions with the cauliflower at the same time to make things easier, and oh my gosh, did these onions have me getting emotional. They were so strong. Then I put it all in the oven to roast with the bread, and then pretty soon the bread was ready to come out. I was pretty nervous to see how they rised because I totally missed and forgot to do the folds, but they actually turned out great. Then I got started getting the table settings ready. I wanted the vibe to feel cozy and comforting, but also fun, so I ended up using this vintage bright green tablecloth and then using these napkin rings, which I barely have used at all, to make some bow napkin designs. Then I lit some candles and poured drinks. We used this Chardonnay from a local winery that I thought would go perfect with the lightness of the cauliflower soup and the pavlova. It was then that I started panicking slightly because I realized that I still hadn't finished making the toppings for the pavlova, so I started making the ganache and the whipped cream while I was getting the soup ready. I used a blender to make it extra creamy, but you could also use a blender stick for this if you have the patience. Then I cut out the top of the bread bowls by just going straight down and pulling, and also inspired by that restaurant, I did a little bit of butter on the bread and toasted the top. It's such a simple touch, but it's so dang good. And I kept stirring the ganache, but it was still kind of lumpy, so I got out my immersion blender to make it a little bit more smooth, and it was exactly what I needed. Then I used my hand mixer to make up some quick whipped cream, and after a little bit of thought, decided to top the pavlova before dinner. I was worried of topping it too early because I thought it might get soggy, but we had it even 2 days later and it did not taste soggy at all. Traditionally, the whipped cream goes on last and you do things like the ganache and the raspberry curd first, but potato, it still is all ending up in the same place, and I did this little swirl on it because it looked pretty weird. And then for fun, I added the cherries. When that was done, we sat down for dinner. I used some reserved cauliflower to garnish the top of it, and oh my gosh, the soup is so creamy. I have been thinking about it ever since. I was worried this menu would be too simple and not feel special enough, but it ended up being the perfect amount of food and so delicious. I would definitely make this exact menu again. See the caption for details on where to find all the recipes.